Draw cat eye sharp enough to have a radical feminist ask why I'm catering to the male gaze. You guys are laughing, but this is true. This has happened to me. Because my life is a fucking joke. Anyways, hi, hello, how's it going? It's Lo. This is going to be a long one, so grab your coffee, your water, your alcohol, whatever it is, because this is the long-awaited video on radical feminism. I know, I've been promising that this video was going to take place sometime soon for a long time, but it's finally here, and it's massive, according to my own script. So strap in. We're going to go over a long time with me talking to a camera about why I detest radical feminism so goddamn much. I have my work computer here with a little accident in the middle of the way because my mom's cat jumped on it, but it's here, the script is here. Let's just cut to the chase, shall we? Because there's a lot that we need to discuss today. If you don't know me, hi, hello, my name is Louisa. You can call me Lou. I am a human rights attorney and a union law attorney working and living in Brazil. And I'm also I have a master's degree in feminist legal theory, and I'm also a PhD candidate at also in feminist legal theory. So I know a thing or two about feminist theory, and I'm going to share that with you guys today. But before we begin, we need to do a little housekeeping, because this is a topic that I find gets a lot of interesting people, let's put it that way. If you came to this video thinking that you're going to find a conservative woman dunking on feminists, you're wrong. Please see yourself out, click the X up above, or watch this video and hate on me. I don't care, give me the ad revenue. However, if you're a radical feminist who came to this video because you want to A, dunk on me, or B, have your views of the world confirmed, this is not going to be the video for you either. So, you know, if that's what you want with this video, I have terrible news for you, which also reminds me, if you're a terf, let me tell you something real quick, okay? I am fully and totally in favor of trans lives. You calling yourself gender critical cannot erase the fact that you're a sad little transphobe who can only find some solace about your own mediocrity by punching down on a population with a life expectancy of 30 years old. You pushing out violence and spewing hateful rhetoric against this population makes you nothing but a hateful human being, and I have absolutely no respect for you. I live in a country that kills the most amount of trans people on the world. I will not be silent or complacent to the violence that they face. And here's the thing, I know what I'm on about. Like I said, I have a PhD in feminist legal theory and I have a master's degree in feminist legal theory. I'm getting my PhD and I have a master's degree. I know what the fuck I'm talking about. And so I'm not gonna bow down to uneducated turf commentary. And I know that you guys have the immediate reaction of doxing, threatening, harassing people who dare to call you out on your bullshit. So if you came around to this video to threaten me to do any of those, or to actually do any of those, let me tell you something. Fuck around and find out. Let's see how well that works out for you. Anyways, for the rest of you, hi, hello, how's it going? Hope you guys are having a great day. I wasn't mad. That was just my unmasked face. Today, we're going to discuss radical feminism, and we're going to do in three main moments as usual. We're going to look into the history of the movement, then we're going to look at the main topics and the core concepts, and then we're going to look at the criticisms that are made on radical feminism as a theory. This is not a personal attack at any of the authors that I cite in this video. This is not a personal attack on anyone. Sometimes I just think things are stupid, and that is my constitutional right to do so. I'm particularly not a radical feminist. I identify as a decolonial feminist, but I was unfortunately subjected on many years of radical feminist studies, and I also was subjected to many years of radical feminist abuse, because how dare I think that I should be able to have a boyfriend? Because, you know, how dare I be bisexual? The shame. But before we begin on the story of radical feminism proper, we need to understand the history of feminism. Now, I have a video entirely on the history of feminism, and I'm gonna link in the cards up above. But long story short, when we're talking about feminist history, we're usually talking about the three main waves of the feminist movement. The first wave being the suffragettes, who were concerned about the political inclusion of women in society via the vote. The second wave is concerned about material conditions of oppression for women, so issues like birth control, childcare, access to the workplace, abortion, all of those. And then third wave we are concerned with matters of identity and intersectionality. So radical feminism began and was developed within the second wave. And now we started to look at the history of the movement of radical feminism. So if it started in the second wave of feminism, you know that this is concerned about the material conditions of womanhood and the material conditions upon which women's oppression will lie. Specifically, radical feminism as we know it began in the late 60s within New Left and Marxist-based movements. And it was concerned initially with the erasure of women and women's issues within the spaces of the New Left and the Marxist movement. Eventually, though, the movement grew beyond Marxism and the New Left to understand women's liberation as autonomous and the need to move forward as a separate movement that catered only to the needs of the liberation of women. They discussed issues of great material concern to women, such as equal pay, access to contraceptives. In the US, they were very much responsible for the improvement of the Equal Rights Amendment. And I think it's important for us to give credit where credit is due here because they were fundamental in shaping the conversation that we still have to this day on abortion. Radical feminists, up until radical feminists, the debate was connected on the need to have compassion for a woman who was in a situation where she would be having a child that she had no way to take care of. And so it was more, the debate of abortion up until that point was more asking for the mercy and the clemency of doctors who could perform this abortion. And radical feminists actually shifted the way that this was understood. Because with radical feminists, what happened is abortion became to be a right over one's own bodies. And so radical feminists were instrumental in shaping the debate and shifting the debate away from a paternalistic perspective of doctors and medicine as the ones who could have a little bit of sensibility towards what women were facing and understanding abortion as the right over a decision over one's one body. And so despite the shortcomings of radical feminism, of which there are many, we do have to give credit where credit is due. However, by 1975, the movement had lost much steam. And it wasn't until very recently that people started calling themselves radical feminists again, which I think is to their own detriment because I don't think that they know what the fuck they're talking about. So let's teach that today, shall we? Because what is radical feminists? I've seen a lot of people saying that radical feminism is radical because it calls for a radical reordering of society. By the way, that's the first line on the Wikipedia page on radical feminism. So I know, if you're coming to my video to say that, or if you're coming to someone's video to say that radical feminism is radical because it calls for a radical reordering of society, you know that I know that the extent of your research was the first line of the Wikipedia page on radical feminism. We've been new. It isn't, by the way, that. So radical feminism is radical feminism because it seeks to go to the root of women's oppression. So let's see what author Kathy Sarah says in Consciousness Raising a Radical Weapon, a major work of radical feminist theory. Let's examine the word radical. It is a word that is often used to suggest extremist, but actually it doesn't mean that. The dictionary says radical means root, coming from the Latin word for root. And that is what we meant by calling ourselves radicals. We were interested in getting to the roots of problems in society. You might say we wanted to pull up the weeds in the garden by their roots, not just pick off the leaves at the top to make things look good momentarily. Women's liberation was started by women who considered themselves radicals in this sense. So as you see, she calls herself radical because she and other radical feminists at the time wanted to go to the root of the issue. Catherine McKinnon will actually say that this means seeing women's oppression as women, or seeing women's oppression as is, meaning without any other category that would muddle the analysis of women as women. So author Judith Grant, which also, by the way, she has an amazing book on the history of radical feminism, I highly, highly recommend. As always, the full references can be found in my Patreon in the description below. But she says the following: the category derives from an early radical feminist notion that women are oppressed not by virtue of their class or race, but simply by the fact of their womanhood. That is, women are oppressed as women. The notion served an important political purpose, both in differentiating feminism from the left and in developing the very concept of feminism. Early radical feminist defenses of women necessitated the recognition of women as a collectivity. We are going to discuss the issues with this later, but here's an abridged list of radical feminist beliefs. Feminism can and must analyze women's oppression as women, meaning without any other oppression, because 1. Women are exploited as a class. 2. That class can be identifiable over a common set of characteristics. 3. That class is trans-historical and trans-cultural. And 4. That this class, meaning gender oppression, is the fundamental oppression, and all other oppressions in the world will derive from it. So let's examine each and every one of those. First thing, women are an oppressed class. T. Grace, or Ty Grace, I never know how to pronounce that name. Also, I don't care enough to look at. T. Grace Atkinson, which we're going to talk about this one later, because boy, did not expect to see a full-out N-word slur when written with all of the letters when I was studying for this video. I will say that. But she says, in an essay that is called Declaration of War, that class is the characteristics that will tie certain individuals to a group. But that, as we are all well aware, is very simplistic. So in order to find a proper definition of what a class is, we're going to turn to an old friend of this channel, which is Catherine McKinnon. Y'all just know how much I love Catherine McKinnon. But anyways, Catherine McKinnon says in her book Towards a Feminist Theory of the State that sexuality is to feminism what labor is to Marxism, that which is most one's own, yet most taken away. The fuck did I just say? Here's what she writes. Sexuality is a social process through which relations of gender are created, organized, expressed, and directed, creating the social beings we know as women and men. As their relations create society. As work is to Marxism, sexuality to feminism is socially constructed yet constructing, universal as activity yet historically specific, jointly comprised of matter and mind. This is what she means. Just like in Marxist theory, the proletariat is created by the expropriation of labor, Catherine McKinnon understands women as being created when they are expropriated of their sexuality. This is a fundamental taking. And without this fundamental taking, there will be no woman for us to speak of. Because if we weren't expropriated of our own sexuality, we wouldn't be women, because we wouldn't be oppressed. Again, we are going to discuss that at length. But let's just understand the main argument here. Because this takes me to my second point, that there is a fundamental characteristic or set of characteristics that can define this class. Meaning that there is a core value or core set of values that will position women as class, that can identify women as women. Things that can be specific for the very specific subset of people. What is this core characteristic will vary from author to author. Catherine McKinnon says that is this expropriation of sexuality. Robin West, who's another radical feminist, will say that it's the burden of reproduction. T. Grace Atkinson agrees. So does Shulamith Firestone. Firestone is much closer to an idea of biological differentiation though. And so like that, like she thinks and she thought, some people will say that is biology that will mark women as women. This defining characteristic will vary according to how sophisticated the theory is. And I hate praising McKinnon for literally anything, but I have to give credit where credit is due. She has the best theory out of all of them. It is the most robust. And also allows her to not be transphobic, because she has said before, and again, I have to be fair, she has said before that she doesn't matter to her how women become women, as long as they are women. And so she has been a rare outlier in the sense that she has been not a transphobe, which is not supposed to be that much to ask. But that's how low the bar has gotten. There's something very amiss with this light. I look yellow. Okay, this looks a bit better. Or not. I don't know why I look so pale. Anyway, I'm dead inside, that's why. Anyway, back to the video. For radical feminists, women are a class organized around a common characteristic. And because of this characteristic, women are oppressed, which take us to our third point, that this oppressed class and their characteristics are trans-historical and transcultural, meaning that they're the same throughout all of history and they're the same in every culture. What this means is that at any given point in history and in every single culture, women will be oppressed as women, and this oppression will be done by men. Again, T. Grace Atkinson says the following: one of the unique features of the class of women is that there has been no essential change in its material conditions from the time of recorded history. Yes, I know you disagree. I do disagree too. But let's just finish our train of thought here, okay? Actually, we do have to hand it to Catherine McKinnon, because, like, she was the only one who was smart enough to get all of this mess and just consolidate it into a coherent theory, because if it weren't for her, all of this would be such a fucking mess. Like, again, radical feminist theory is so solid that they make me like Catherine McKinnon, and that is all that I'm going to say on the matter. Shulamith Firestone also says the following: for feminist revolution, we shall need an analysis of the dynamics of sex war as comprehensive as the Marx-Engels analysis of class antagonism was for the economic revolution. More comprehensive, for we are dealing with a larger problem, with an oppression that goes back beyond recorded history to the animal kingdom itself. And so what Shulamith Firestone thinks is that because of this biological function to reproduce, the status of women throughout ages and centuries and places has not changed much, and it's always a status of oppression. Not only that, the final argument in what I consider to be the core of radical feminist belief and thought is that this transhistorical and transcultural oppression is the basis of all other oppression. So here's what T. Grace Atkinson says again. The political class of women, or the female role, is generally agreed to be the earliest political class in history. Therefore, all known cultures are constructed with the oppression of women as the major foundational ingredient, i.e., the class of women is the key functional unit in all of our social, economic, and political institutions and values. And Shulamith Firestone also says, the natural reproductive difference between the sexes led directly to the first division of labor at the origins of class, as well as furnishing the paradigm of caste, discrimination based on biological characteristics. I'm reading a lot, and I'm sorry. It's just that I need to back what I'm saying, that this is what radical feminism thinks. T. Grace Atkinson, Catherine McKinnon, and Shulamith Firestone were major figures in radical feminist thinking, and I'm trying to avoid the actually on my comments, because every time that we point out that radical feminism has issues from its inception, it's like all of the radical feminists come from the sewers to be like, actually, you didn't understand it properly, because that's not what it says. It fucking says that. It's on the fucking book. I read it. I suffered. I paid for this. Okay? I've read all these books so many times, and every single time I want to cry blood, because I am taking the parts that are only good enough to be discussed. But when we get to the end, you guys will see what I'm talking about when I say about crying blood. Okay? Okay. Point is, this is what we can understand as the main pillars of radical feminism. Women are a class. This class can be defined by a single set of characteristics or a core set of characteristics. This class is transhistorical and transcultural, and this class is the foundational class in all other classes. So the oppression of women will be the oppression that sets the tone for all other oppressions in the world. Okay, with this in mind, let's understand why I disagree with it so much. Before we understand why I disagree with it so much, there is a distinction that we need to make, and that is a distinction between sex and gender. Sex is what we call the organic matter of your body, and gender is a psychological, biological, and social construct, meaning that it takes your biology, it takes your psychology, and it also takes society to form a gender. This is something that is broader. It's something that is imposed on a sexed body, but it's not necessarily attached to that sexed body. We're going to look a little bit more into this later when we look at the history thing. But this is what we need to understand right now to understand the critiques that are done on radical feminist thinking. After radical feminism peaked, we had feminists who were much more interested in talking about gender instead of sex, like many radical feminists used to, because they wanted something that could denote this difference from the biological structure and that which is constructed in society. There's this really good historian, her name is Joan Scott, and she has this super famous paper called Gender, a Useful Category of Analysis, that will discuss a little bit the problems with class as a category of analysis. And she says the following: when we invoke class, we are working with or against a set of definitions that, in case of Marxism, involve an idea of economic causality and a vision of the path along which history has moved dialectically. There is no such clarity or coherence for either race or gender. In the case of gender, the usage has involved a range of theoretical positions, as well as simple descriptive references to the relationships between sexes. So she already goes for the neck of radical feminism in just a paragraph, because to see women as class, meaning it means using a framework of analysis that is inherently Marxist in its origin, and that it's tied to an idea of an economic causality that had a thesis and antithesis and antithesis and a synthesis in the form of dialectical materialism. She argues that this can't be the same for gender because gender is not a category the way class is. We're going to discuss this a little bit later, but right now I want us to focus on how class has some problematic aspects to it when it comes to using it as a tool of analysis. Because class, in its original Marxist inception, is divided between people who have the ownership of the means of production and people who don't have the ownership of the means of production, and therefore they have to sell their labor in order to survive. You can see that this is a very binary definition. So the definition is either you have this or you don't. And if you have the means of production, then you are a capitalist. And if you don't, and you have to sell your labor to work, no matter how much you make, you are a proletariat. And so the proletariat has divisions between itself, but it doesn't matter because the proletariat will still be the proletariat. And this is very clearly not the case with gender and race. They don't work the same. It's not the same functioning. It's not like you can just be something or be something else. It's not that binary. It's not that clear cut. With race, that is very obvious, but it is also the same with gender. Both gender and race are spectrums. And so if you adopt a binary position, you will exclude people from that class. And so instead of understanding gender as a class, I prefer to understand it as an analytical category. What the fuck is an analytical category? I have explained this before, and I think that this is a very interesting way to see gender, and I've kind of developed this over my thesis, in my master's thesis. But gender has almost like two ways to be seen. One way is as a personal identity, and the other way is as analytical category. Gender as a personal identity is what a person identifies as. That is none of my business. I don't need to tell that person that they're right or they're wrong. It's not up to me. My duty is to respect what they want to be identified as. So there is no discussion on that. Gender as an analytical category, however, is different because it's a point from which I will depart my analysis. So Joe and Scott will explain gender as a category of analysis as the following. Gender provides a way to decode meaning and to understand the complex connections amongst the various forms of human interaction. When historians look for the ways in which the concept of gender legitimizes and constructs social relationships, they develop insight into the reciprocal nature of gender and society and into the particular and contextually specific ways in which politics construct gender and gender construct politics. So the main difference between gender as a class and gender as a category of analysis is that this category doesn't need necessarily a set of characteristics to bind it together because it's a point of reference. And so if we have, for instance, the cultural idea of woman as a point of reference, we can ask ourselves what happens to the people who fit into that category and what happens to the people who don't. What happens when you don't hit? If you establish some parameters on who is considered a man and who is considered a woman, you're able to be like, okay, what happens to the people who reach those parameters? What are the consequences for you to fit in? And what are the consequences when you don't fit in? When you're gender non-conforming, when you are neither? What are the consequences? What are the violences involved in trying to keep us in this gender place? And what are the violences that involve being in this gender place? And so I feel like the analysis of gender as a category allows for a better refinement of theory than gender as a class. You can see gender as a class, that's not theoretically wrong. And it makes sense within the scope of radical feminist thinking. I just think that it doesn't allow for a sophisticated analysis as gender as a category of analysis does, because you have to spend so much time defining what this core binding characteristic is. What's interesting about gender as a category to me is that you don't have to exclude people from it in order for it to still be valid, because it's almost like a coin, and the flip side is gender as identity. And so I can respect everyone's identity, but I want to know what happens to people who fit into that category or who don't fit into that category. It's a form of analyzing society. It's a form of seeing how society is structured around this institution, this way of allocating power that is gender. An example of that, if you say that women are people who have vaginas, there are people with vaginas who are not women, and there are women who do not have vaginas. And so what are the consequences for those who are women but don't have vaginas, and those who have vaginas but are not women? What are the violences that they're subjected to? What are the violences that they escaped of? If they try to come back, what are the violences that will happen to them? And so analyzing that allows you to understand oppression better. So I think that the category of that, understanding gender as a category, allows for more sophisticated theory. That is my opinion on it. So it's different with class, because when you don't reach a parameter for a class, you're not a part of that class. So if I say women are women because women are burdened with reproduction, and then you say, well, trans women don't have wombs, so they can't be, they're not affected by reproduction in the same way, then the immediate correlation is then trans women are not women, because to be a woman you have to be a part of this foundational characteristic, which is being burdened by reproduction. This makes no sense. And so my problem with seeing women as a class is that it's inherently exclusionary. And now we get to talk about one of my least favorite things in feminist theory, which is gender essentialism. Gender essentialism is the idea that women can be defined by this single core characteristic. But gender essentialism, like I said, has two main issues. The first one is that it's exclusionary in its nature, and the second one is that it denies women accountability. Listen, if I say this is a blue water bottle, okay, you will know immediately that this is not a green water bottle, okay? This is a blue water bottle, therefore it cannot be a green water bottle. This is basic logic, right? If I tell you, please go to my room and pick up my blue water bottle, you will pick up my blue water bottle. But if I tell you, please go to my room and pick up my green water bottle, and you come to my room and you don't find any green bottles, you will come back empty-handed and say, I haven't found your green water bottle. So as you can see, when you define something, you're necessarily saying that this something is also not something else. And so definition and essentialism by its nature is also exclusionary. We've seen two definitions of women, one by Catherine McKinnon saying that women are women because they're forcibly expropriated of their sexuality, and the definition by Shulamith Firestone and Tigris Atkinson, which is women are women because they have a biology that is burdened by reproduction. But both are exclusionary in their own way, because here's the thing. In order to McKinnon's theory to function and to work, women always have to lose. Because if you don't lose, if you're not subjected to this violent taking and expropriating of your sexuality, then you're not this victim of domination, and then you're not really a woman. Because women are formed in this fundamental taking, this fundamental violence. And to be a woman is inherently to be a victim of violence, and that is exclusionary as fuck. But this is also exclusionary when you say that women are women because of their biology, because people who believe in biological essentialism, which is the groundwork for TERFs, if you don't know what TERFs is trans-exclusive radical feminists. But biological essentialism is the baseline work for work, and this is why sometimes people will say, oh, a woman is an adult female human, which is... No, it's not. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Because the idea here, and it's exclusive, it's much clearer why this is exclusive, because if you cannot reproduce, if you're not a woman who can reproduce, then you're not a woman. But this is fucking stupid, because the human body is fucking weird. There is this author that I really like, she's called Anne Foster Sterling, and she wrote a book called Sexing the Body. And in this book, she did this very handy dandy little diagram with all the different sexes that exist in our body. So you have a chromosomal sex, you have a fetal hormonal sex, genital sex, a brain sex, or whatever. There are various parts
of your body that are tied to different parts of your sense of gender. And here's the thing about this handy-dandy diagram. This diagram doesn't have to be coherent. So it can be XX, but your body image says that you're XY. And there is no problem in that because your human body does that. Radical feminists does do this thing where conservatives also do, where they confound the natural and the normal. Because natural is everything that happens in your body, everything that happens in nature. And if it happens in nature, it means your body was supposed to do that. Now, a normal thing is a thing that is considered acceptable by society standards. And so when people say, oh, that's not natural, what they mean is that that's not normal. That is not according to the norm that rules society. But natural is, because if your body is doing it, then it's natural. It's very exclusionist in the way that it excludes even people who are socially understood as women from an early age. Like, you might be a baby who has an XY chromosome gene, and then you are insensitive to testosterone, and so you were born with a fully formed and functional vagina. Are you going to turn to this person and say, actually, darling, you're not a woman? That has created so much issue in the Olympics. It's not a joke. Like, people have been cut off of the Olympics because they took genetic testing, a lot of people, and they found that they had XY chromosomes. And they thought that they just had problems to get pregnant. It's not that they didn't have problems to get pregnant. It's just that your X chromosome will only go so far with the hormones. And if you're indifferent to testosterone, if you can't process testosterone in your body, then you are not going to be getting a dick. And that's just how it functions. And so when you say things like this, you are actually excluding not only trans people, but other people who are gender non-conforming, even biologically. Another thing is that gender essentialism eradicates women of color.
Here's what an author that I really like called Angela Harris has to say about essentialism and how essentialism erases women of color. Essentialism in feminist theory has two characteristics that ensure that Black women's voices will be ignored. First, in the pursuit of the essential feminine, woman is leached of all color and irrelevant social circumstance. Issues of race are bracketed as belonging to a separate and distinct discourse, a process which leaves Black women's selves fragmented beyond recognition. Second, feminist essentialists find that in removing issues of race, they have actually only managed to remove Black women, meaning that white women now stand as the epitome of woman. Both processes can be seen at work in dominance theory. By the time McKinnon has finished elaborating her theory, Black women have completely vanished. Remaining are only white women with an additional burden. And she also says, any essential self is an invention. The evil is in denying its artificiality. To be compatible with this conception of the self, feminist theorizing must be similarly strategic and contingent, focusing on relationships, not essence. And saying that something is the essence of a thing, it means that it cannot change, which is fucked up, bro. Because if you say that the essence of women is being formed by a violent taking of their sexuality, what you're saying is that there can be no women formed otherwise. And so why are we fighting for liberation at all? There is no need. And so what we conclude here is that gender is not a core shared identity. It's not an essence. It's not an essence that is taken from you. So fire lore feelings. Believing that it is actually will also undermine women's ability to cause harm. Here's the thing. There's this awful lecture by Catherine McKinnon called Practice and Theory, or What is a White Woman Anyways, where she says that when you say white women, you're discrediting white women's status as oppressed. Because if women are equal oppressed and white equal oppressor, one will cancel the other, and thus white women's oppression will be gone. I wish I was joking with this reasoning. I am not. This is something that she said as a lecture to Harvard. I just want to say that she went to Harvard to talk to Black women in Harvard, and she said that. That's just what I want to say. So when you say something along the lines of white women are fucking wild, radical feminism will understand it as an attack on women, because in order for you to be a woman, you have to be a victim. And if a woman is a perpetrator, that means that she's not a victim. And if she's not a victim, then you're saying that she's not oppressed. So when you stack oppressions like that, it's almost like it's exactly what Angela Harris said. It's like you're stacking oppressions, right? So white women are oppressed and black women are oppressed as black men. And so you add that on top. And then black women will be oppressed as white women, but worse. And so when you say, oh, she's a woman, but she's a white woman, it's almost like you're taking away the oppression block and you're denying their status as a victim of an oppression. If this sounds familiar, because it sounds like every other rad femme who is trying to wiggle their way out of accountability by being like, you're being violent when you say that against white women because women are oppressed and you're discounting our oppression. Yeah, no shit, Sherlock. But they're also white. And they, for instance, have power over black men that black men have nothing to do with it. It's like, you guys remember To Kill a Mockingbird? Wait, there is this part in To Kill a Mockingbird that I feel highlights that extremely well. It's part of the trial where he says the following: I have nothing but pity in my heart for the chief witness for the state, but my pity does not extend so far as to her putting a man's life at stake, which she has done in an effort to get rid of her own guilt. She is the victim of cruel poverty and ignorance, but I cannot pity her. She is white. She knew full well the enormity of her offense, but because her desires were stronger than the code that she was breaking, she persisted in breaking it. This part highlights precisely the issue with radical feminism. If you've read To Kill a Mockingbird, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He's talking about Mayella Ewell, who was a woman who accused a black man of a rape that did not happen. And she, in order to get out, she kissed the guy. And in order to get out of it, she claimed that he had raped her in order for her to avoid punishment from her dad. And so she's a victim. She's a victim. She's a victim of circumstance. She's a victim of poverty. She's a victim of a lot of stuff. But she's also a perpetrator. Just like that fucked up woman is also a perpetrator in Emmett Till's case. And you have radical feminists like Susan Brown Miller who will be like, well, but, she felt violated by his whistle. The boy was lynched, motherfuckers. Thank God Angela Davis exists, because in Women, Race, and Class, she goes for the throat of Susan Brown Miller with that one. And in that horrifying text by Catherine McKinnon, she also says something to the same line and to the same effect. So when I say, we're going to talk about it. But all of this leads me to my third point, which is women are not oppressed the same throughout history and throughout culture. This is an insane assumption. Shulamith Firestone, there's a part in her book where she actually says, this is a long one, I'm so sorry, but y'all have to listen to this. These biological contingencies of the human family cannot be covered over with anthropological sophistries. Anyone observing animals mating, reproducing, and caring for their young will have a hard time accepting the cultural relativity line. For no matter how many tribes in Oceania you can find where the connection of the father to fertility is not known, no matter how many matrilineages, no matter how many cases of sex role reversal, male housewifery, or even empathic labor pains, these facts prove only one thing: the amazing flexibility of human nature. But human nature is adaptable to something. It is, yes, determined by its environmental conditions. And the biological family that we have described has existed everywhere throughout time. Even in matriarchies where women's fertility is worshipped and the father's role is unknown or unimportant, if perhaps not on the genetic father, there is still some dependence of the female and the infant on the male. Shulamith, no. Oh my god. I will say reading all of this has been just so painful. Like, studying radical feminism is that one TikTok of the guy just going, the racist, the racist, the racist, all over again. Because Jesus fucking Christ. Like, T. Great Atkinson dropped this one in a text, okay? Hear me out. To the women in the audience, I say, think about these things with the man you love and want the most. Scratch his love and you'll find your fear. You'll be afraid you'll die, and the woman will die, but your life will be born, and you'll begin to be free. To the men in the audience, I say, move on over, baby, or we'll move on over you, because all the good is dead. The N-word with all of the letters. All of the letters. When I'm editing, I'll probably redact them, because I'm very uncomfortable, but she went there. Damn. Also, by the way, the woman who very clearly enunciated all of these letters, yep, she's upsetting spaghetti at trans people. Surprising absolutely no one. Anyway, there's two things here that we need to analyze. One is how gender varies throughout history, and the second one is how gender varies in culture. And so when it comes to history, Joe and Scott will say the following. Whether domination comes in the form of the male appropriation of the female's reproductive labor or in the sexual objectification of women by men, the analysis rests on physical difference. Any physical difference takes on a universal and unchanging aspect, even if theorists of patriarchy take into account the existence of changing forms and systems of gender inequality. A theory that rests on the single variable of physical difference poses problems for historians. It assumes a consistent or inherent meaning for the human body, outside of social and cultural construction, and thus the ahistoricity of gender itself. History becomes, in a sense, epiphenomenal, providing endless variations on the unchanging theme of a fixed gender identity. What she says here, in other words, is that for the historians, when you say that gender is gender because of biological factors that are not rooted in history, what you're saying is that gender throughout history has always been just a repetition of itself, that things always happen the same way throughout thousands of years of human history. And that is just simply not true. That is ludicrous. To imagine that for I don't know how many thousands of years of humanity as a whole, that societies will only have organized in this very way that is very particular and specific to the 1960s white women living in the Upper East Side of New York City. Everywhere. It's been like this everywhere. Every time, no matter where you look in history, it's not. And I have evidence that it's not, which takes me to my second point of the matter of culture. Because here's the thing. There is this Nigerian author called Oyeronke Oyewumi, and she is of Yoruba. She's a Yoruba writer. She says that in pre-colonial Yoruba society, age and not gender was the organizing principle. And so this is what she says about it. The process by which females were categorized and reduced to women made them ineligible for leadership roles. The basics for this exclusion was their biology, a process that was a new development in Yoruba society. The emergence of women as an identifiable category defined by their anatomy and subordinated to men in all situations resulted in part from the imposition of a patriarchal colonial state. For females, colonization was a twofold process of racial inferiorization and gender subordination. It's clear. It's here. It's here. It's in the fucking books. If people had just taken 5 fucking seconds to do some thorough research and not just read the first fucking page of Wikipedia, I would not have to be sitting here and saying the obvious, that this oppression doesn't fucking exist at any given point and at any given time, like the exact same thing. I can't fucking, it's just so fucking, it's unbelievable. Anyways, so tell me, how can you see into my eyes and tell me that gender as it is experienced by a white lady in New York City is the same fucking thing as gender as it is experienced by a Yoruba lady before colonization of Nigeria? This makes absolutely no fucking sense. No fucking sense. It's as bad as my singing, I will say. And this is my last point, by the way, because just as thinking that gender is the fundamental thing that exists throughout society, throughout the ages and throughout history and whatnot, it also makes no fucking sense for us to think that gender is the original, the OG oppression. Kimberly Crenshaw already told us that the way that oppression works is intersectionality. It's not like you start with a base. It's not Jenga, okay? Oppression is not Jenga. Oppression, it's almost like a knitted blanket, right? It's not that you stack stuff on top and you can pull them out as you wish until it comes a moment where it comes crashing down. It's like if you pull one thread, it will unravel the whole thing because oppressions are connected one another and they amplify one another and they diminish one another. It's a very complex interweaving web of interaction between oppressions. They're not separated in individual characteristics. So if they're not separated and they're so tightly together, how can you fucking say that gender is the original oppression? It isn't. It doesn't work like that. See, this is why gender studies are revolutionary, not because they want a radical reordering of society. Everybody fucking wants that. None of y'all are special. But because what gender studies can do is to understand that if they pull one thread, there is a whole lot of threads that can come with it. And the whole fabric of society can collapse if you ask that one question. And this is why Angela Harris says in her text, Race and Essentialism in Feminist Legal Theory, that we don't need a unified theory of oppression. That theory can be feminism. When we ask the feminist question, when we ask, who does this gender serve for? What happens to people who are gender non-conforming? What happens to people if they don't fit that specific status? If we see gender as a category, that means that we can also unravel other senses of oppression that are tied in with women and the oppression of gender as a whole. So this is why they're radical. They aren't radical because they are saying that love doesn't exist and that vaginal orgasms are a figment of people's imagination, which are things that I have read with these two eyes that the earth shall one day swallow. Or not, because I want to be cremated. But because when you start asking and thinking of gender as a category of analysis, the level of the analysis that you can make becomes much deeper. You can go much deeper. And not only that, you won't only unravel your own oppression. You won't only pull out your own piece of the Jenga tower, because the Jenga tower will remain intact. You will pull out a thread that will unravel the whole thing. Jesus Christ, I spoke too much. Anyway, this was not a very short overview on radical feminism, I will admit, but it was an overview of the history, the concepts, and the criticisms that are made on radical feminism. If you have any questions, you can feel welcome to leave them in the description below. And if you want to compensate my emotional labor for reading T. Grace Atkinson for the second fucking time in a year, you can compensate me by going on my Ko-fi and buying me a coffee, because holy shit, that was emotionally damaging. Like, for real, listen to this. It is the function of men to oppress. It is the function of men to exploit. It is the function of men to lie and to betray and to humiliate, to crush, to ignore, and the final insult. It is the function of men to tell women that men's iniquities are women's function. Damn. Yeah, I ranted a lot, but I know more than I should about this, and this gets me really pissed. If you're interested about both the references that I use for this video, the complete list with the pages and indication, etc., and if you're interested in having access to the digital library where all of these texts will be made available, you can also check my Patreon in the description below. We have a Discord now, so we can have fun together talking shit about radical feminists. Feel free to quote me at terfs, that is fine. Feel free to tell terfs to come at me, that is also fine. There's absolutely nothing that terfs can do that will ruin my life. If you want to call my boss and be like, oh no, she's defending trans people online, my boss will be like, yeah, that's why she was hired. My parents are pretty much aware. You're gonna out me to my parents, they know I'm cis. There's nothing you can do. That's just it. I will now have something to eat and a glass of wine because I'm starving and I'm sweating. It's very hot and I have my windows closed so I could record. So yeah, this was today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, this long-awaited exploration of radical feminism, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!